Kathleen Hemberg. She's going to be talking to us about running a competitive bid. Kathleen is from Atlanta, Georgia. She graduated from Northwood University with a bachelor's in business management and marketing, and then graduated from Texas A&M School of Law with a master's in legal studies. Kathleen has over 20 years of experience in procurement, including roles as Senior Director of Procurement at Advanced Auto Parts. And then she's currently the Senior Director of Procurement at Inspire Brands, which includes companies such as Arby's, Buffalo Wild Wings, Baskin Robbins, Dunkin' Donuts, Sonic, and Jimmy John's. So with that introduction, Kathleen, if you want to go ahead and get us started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Reed. Quite the introduction there. So good afternoon. As Reed clearly articulated, I'm here to talk to everyone about running a competitive bid. And a successful competitive bid begins with a meticulously defined scope of work. A strong scope of work with a clearly articulating the problem you're trying to solve and how this procurement exercise really goes through and bridges that gap. Now, once you've gone ahead, you've identified your scope of work, the problem that you're trying to solve, you need to socialize them into different attributes and qualifications of the vendor pool that you'd like to include. A few attributes that could be included are things like a vendor's global footprint. Are they, global, regional, just local within the, field of what you're looking at? What's the unit of measure that you're sending them out for, right? That's the most basic one is pricing. You then start to dive into areas like implementation fees and support. If there is any need in that area, like technology or tool, make sure that you go ahead and you clearly define that scope and capability. And then, of course, flushing into other areas like guarantees and SLAs. When you do go ahead and you look at goods like packaging, any sort of tangible good that you're going out to market for, you're running a bid on, you want to consider some areas like your tooling cost. So who is covering the cost for the tool, making sure that it's underscored and lined within your RFP exercise. And then, of course, other areas like delivery. Is your shipping going to be FOP, your DAC? Is that going to be included in the cost of your items, like a per line item cost? Or is there a separate line item? Maybe you need to set up a delivery schedule. You do want to go ahead and get as granular as you can with your scope and the problem that you're trying to solve up front. Because, of course, any RFP is going to go ahead and directly lead into that strong contract negotiation. You're setting the stage up front with what you're looking for. And a lot of these elements and attributes that you identify in the RFP should then be cornerstoned within your contract down the road. I also recommend implementing a pre-qualification process. I found this to be crucial with assessing different vendors, their experience, financial stability, and ensuring that a vendor's capability is right there in where we can permission them to participate in the bidding process. To conduct a pre-qualification process, I include things like a financial check. So looking at your vendors, running maybe even a D&B is a good example to verify whether or not they have the strong backbone and they are in a position where they could support you long-term as a strategic vendor. Other things that might be included in this initial check are preliminary calls. So you should be reaching out to your vendor pool before you send them an RFP to make sure that they can procure what you are looking to deliver. And that could be from manufacturing, stateside versus overseas, all the way to does their technology and their tool integrate with other technologies and solutions that you need it to integrate with internally. Having this pre-qualification has been really helpful for me and my team internally with identifying vendors that shouldn't be included in the RFP, but then also mitigating some potential risk that could take flight down the road throughout the RFP process. It just saves time and effort across the board. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So once you've defined your project scope and the problem, again, that you're truly trying to solve for, you need to establish a clear proposal requirements and instructions for your fair bidding process. I recommend providing templates where you can. This standardizes how a vendor should be submitting, and it helps to level out the playing field. Then you don't have that vendor submitting their template and their way of working when you really need to have it returned and digested into your business and your business ways of working. Furthermore, maintaining transparent communication throughout the bidding process is helpful to build trust and prevent misunderstandings, which is vital for fostering relationships with your vendors and your future strategic partners. So when I think about templates and a clear proposal requirement, some tools that I've used in the past and would be, great solutions that are out there are like a Workday Sourcing, a Jagger, a Coupa. We know SAP Ariba can do this all as well. They can help to streamline the setup of your RFPs, create clear and concise evaluation criteria. Evaluating your vendors throughout your RFP process does need to be consistent. We all like to say that apples to apples comparison. Well, it starts from the beginning and how you set up your RFP template. And then when you talk about communication with your vendors, really setting up and scheduling those regular updates. So recommending scheduling periodic check-ins with your vendors on the RFP, making sure that you're sending out notes that, for example, reminds them 3 days before the RFP is due, sending out clear, concise, consistent feedback around when answers are coming up, if you had a Q&A period within your RFP. And there, again, back to those tools and those capabilities that I previously mentioned, a lot of those tools actually do have scheduled capabilities that you can leverage. If not, if you're using something like an Outlook, it's as simple as just, pre-scheduling and sending those out. All right, next slide. So as we know, leveraging technology is really pivotal in optimizing the RFP process, inclusive of contract execution. Implementing advanced bid management software not only streamlines operations, but also enhances our ability to track deadlines, foster collaboration amongst team members. Technology integration ensures efficiency and precision throughout the procurement cycle. Some technologies in the contracting space that I've either seen used or had experience with could be from an Ironclad to Adobe, a DocuSign, Icertis, Cobblestone, just naming a few. But again, back to your RFP really starts this entire tone for the contract and the strategic partnership. So you want to emphasize best practices within that contracting and leveraging these technologies to strengthen the partnership. This approach fosters collaboration across your business using your technology. It drives mutual success and long-term value creation. And integrating a tool and a solution will also enhance effectiveness of procurement processes down the road and ensure robust vendor relationships and optimal outcomes. Part of the tool in understanding supplier contracts is also understanding where you can look at audits throughout supplier contracts too. I'm here supporting our very strategic partner Audit Tech today, and it is critical for us to ensure that we have audit rights within all of our agreements. We write those in to make sure that any vendor that we partner with, when we go back and we look at our contract and how we've been performing with them over a set period of time, that they're billing us to the contract, their SLAs are aligned with the contract, and that we're true partners on both sides of the fence.
So Kathleen, I have a kind of a question or maybe an opportunity for you to elaborate a little bit more, but when you're dealing with the detailed specifications, one thing that I've seen a challenge for procurement professionals is trying to make sure that different vendors, different suppliers understand the same expectations. Obviously you want to get the language as good as possible, but do you have any, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you have any kind of best practices to make sure that, you know, supplier A and supplier B really understand what the specifications are the same, so that you don't end up with kind of apples and oranges when those responses come back?
Absolutely. That goes to getting as granular as you can throughout the RFP. So if you are, as an example, going to market for packaging, you're going to want to put in there that the requirement is a per thousand, or are you looking for a flat cost? But tell them this is how you need to price it. Include those additional line items that you want broken out. You know, tell them prescriptively this needs to be a delivered price, tooling needs to be included, print plates, you know, Flexicor plates, whatever it may be. But make sure that you are incredibly prescriptive throughout all of that RFP and that delivery. I think the same thing is really applicable when it comes to technology and looking at technology RFPs and implementations. You really want to go through and make sure that you flush out, when you're looking at a new tool, what the total cost of ownership is. What is that cost for that tool, that inclusive of implementation? Are there any ad hoc fees for attaching to other systems within your ecosystem? For example, if you're putting in a timekeeping tool, are there additional costs for attaching to your payroll tool? Let's just make sure you flush all of those out up front.
Yeah, and I'll add some emphasis on that, how important that is. I remember it was probably about 10 years ago. I was on site and I was doing a lot of visits for some of our contract audits. And we were visiting a company down in Florida, and it was one of the few times that we had a supplier happy to see us. They said, "I'm so happy that our shared client is doing this process," because that individual felt like they were losing bids because they were following the actual expectations of the bid, and his competitors were doing some creative, you know, markup, creative accounting things that they felt they could slip into the bid. And so, you know, it really kind of struck me that when there's not a clarity on what the expectations are, it really creates an unfair playing field, because in this case, you know, this supplier would bid cost plus 19% on materials. He would lose to cost plus 15%. But the people who won with cost plus 15% were doing cost plus a 20% overhead plus 15%. And so they were really, you know, closer to 40%. And this guy's losing at 19. And so, you know, again, I'm not a procurement professional, and you know, you've forgotten more than I'll ever know. But that really struck in my mind that, you know, sometimes you're losing, you know, the better price, maybe even the better vendor from a delivery perspective, because you know it's apples and oranges again.
Yeah, and it's making sure that you clearly have your arms wrapped around one, the scope, the need, but also the industries and the player. So you had a great call out here about apples and oranges, right? And another space where I've seen that happen quite frequently is in the contingent or temp labor space. There's different agencies out there, quite a few, thousands. They're global, they're regional, you name it. But they also have different approaches in the marketplace. Sometimes it is a markup, sometimes it's a higher margin. You need to understand and sit back and sit down with them and ask them how that's broken out. Let them know what your expectations are as the customer, and make sure that they meet you there. So for example, if you are placing temp labor in a DC and your business only wants to permission a 50% markup coast to coast, and we all know that labor in Indiana could potentially be cheaper than labor in California. But you've got to make that as a clear expectation, and then make them break down the pricing to include it that way. So you clearly know, okay, if it's 50% markup and you're charging me $100, the agency's making 50, the employee's making 50.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, and temp labor is one that we've definitely seen kind of more like what Ben kind of mentioned, where, how are they calculating their costs? Like, is it just what the employee gets paid bottom dollar, or are they including their overhead as part of that? And that clear, detailed specification can really help drive that home.
Absolutely. Yeah. Temp labor is a different one. So as we go along to kind of dive into the common pitfalls of a bid process. So before you run off and you go ahead and you tackle your next sourcing event, I want to go ahead and just address some of the common pitfalls in a bid process. It's really crucial for avoiding common mistakes to understand what some of the pitfalls are. So effective risk management is essential to prevent significant financial loss. And let's start with just a high level one, which is rushing bids. So rushing bids in RFPs, that's not just a copy and paste, that's a net new exercise and a net new opportunity, could potentially lead to overlooked details, compromising the quality of the submission. Thoroughly reviewing the bids is truly vital for ensuring success. Another example of risk mitigation in one scenario that I have is I was working with our team internally at a different company, in fact, with looking at social media influencers. And we were going through and looking at the organizations, which were agencies, based on how they were performing financially, what their cost model was, how they were going to support the business. But because we did this rushed bid, unfortunately, there was a lack within how that agency should be paid. And we also actually missed part of a D&B, which is a financial check. And what happened in the back end is they actually fell down on some SLAs because they couldn't get some social media programs out in time. And then because of the lack of compliance with the payment terms, we brought audit tech in. They ran a duplicate payment for audit for us. And we found that we accidentally duplicate paid this vendor because things were clearly and concisely buttoned up front within that RFP process. Go ahead, Ray. So coordination among team members and vendors is critical to the success of a bidding process. A lack of coordination can lead to miscommunication and inaccuracies in bids. Furthermore, ensuring that all required documentation is submitted is vital because incomplete submissions can result, of course, in delays or even rejections of a bid. And you should, when a vendor isn't submitting on time, that's part of your requirement. And you've got to hold them accountable for that, taking into consideration if they can't submit a bid on time, can they deliver your product on time? Excuse me here. My apologies. So common pitfalls of this process include stakeholder alignment. We need to work across the business and clearly identify who the solution impacts, who should have a say in the project, along with the management committee that makes the decision. This is really critical for program success. Communicate often, consistently, wherever possible, and pull all parties together when you're going ahead and you're communicating the project status in a programmatic way. So one example here is on a large timekeeping project that I just ran, which was an RFP, I had bi-weekly meetings with my internal stakeholders to touch base on the status of the RFP. And at those time and during those bi-weekly meeting cadences, we would go through anything that came up, any changes within the project, any changes within the scope. Then I would go ahead and send out a monthly, larger, what we would call management committee email, and update the leadership team on the impact of the project at that time, which was truly at more of a high level, not so granular. So communicating frequently, often, consistently on an RFP, and updating everyone on the project.
So I'd throw an ad in here as well on my side, just to reinforce what you're saying. I use a term, I don't even know if this is correct use of the term, but the term maverick spend, where there's a contract in place with a vendor, with a supplier, and it doesn't cover a category of spend. And so therefore the vendor, the supplier can kind of bill whatever. There's bad expectations. I think a lot of times that happens, as you were talking there, because the right stakeholders aren't brought in. So if Kathleen goes through, an RFP process, a bid process, and doesn't bring in, 2 or 3 key stakeholders, she would never do that were supposed to be brought in. It can create a situation where now the vendor and the suppliers providing services, providing product that are different than what the contract has accounted for. And now it's, again, the term I like to use is maverick spend. It's not accounted for. It doesn't have a definition. And so, I really love that idea of making sure everyone who needs to be at the table is at the table early on, because, if you get through this proposal process and they become a new vendor, a new supplier for you, and key parts of your business weren't involved in it, you're probably going to have some, unregulated or uncontracted spend that can get out of hand real quick.
Certainly. And another pitfall that I've seen a lot throughout my career is misalignment across organizations. So you might sit within the seat of driving and owning an RFP process, and you're all excited to bring this new vendor and solution forward to the business. And then you connect with IT, and IT didn't have it on their roadmap. They didn't have it in their scope, and it gets deprioritized. That has happened, I think, a dozen times to all of us. Other, pitfalls or opportunities that I've seen is funding, where you get to the finish line and you've ran, a 5-month, 4-month RFP, and it was robust and thorough with reference calls and, great T's and C's in the contracts, but you're getting ready to sign and funding goes away. So the more alignment you have across your organization at all different levels helps to flush out any of those potential curveballs or anomalies sooner than later.
Kathleen, so kind of just to lead you towards another example, I guess. So you're working at Inspire Brands right now. So that's, half a dozen different companies, right? Can you kind of talk about how, what sort of challenges you've had to overcome of, working with essentially half a dozen different companies and half a dozen different stakeholders there and coordinating those?
Yeah, Inspire Brands is an incredible company by nature, right? You're talking a big organization that owns all of these reputable brands that we may have gone to this morning, from Dunkin' Donuts, Jimmy John's, Buffalo Wild Wings. But with Inspire being only 7 years old, we are a young organization in nature with all these really well-established brands. So one of our biggest opportunities with running RFPs is the collaboration and the change management across the brands and across the business. That is just massive. With you've got, different brands that are used to working independently. They're used to sourcing their own items, running in their own directions. And you, as now a corporate procurement team, need to go through and make some friends really quickly, link arms with them, and try to get everyone to source together and find what we call those economies of scale, which is the entire vision of Inspire, right? It's bringing those brands together to get those economies of scale. It is one of the biggest challenges, and I'm certain it's probably one of the biggest challenges at other companies too, because it is getting people aligned on the same message and the same purpose. I know that was a lot of information in a very quick or short period of time. But as we do wrap up, I want to go ahead and invite anyone, any questions or anyone to raise their hand and speak up. This is an opportunity for me to go ahead and clarify any points discussed today, or to certainly delve deeper into specific areas of interest regarding competitive bidding, RFP processing, vendor selection. If you do have questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat.
So I just got one question coming up from on a side chat, Kathleen. It was, how do you not only get alignment on content, but also get alignment on priority?
Oh, burning question, right? Well, business priority already always starts top down. So it is understanding, with what you're working at, what's the goal and the vision for the organization for the year? And does this initiative fit into that? And then you get into the department goals, right? So if we go top level, what's your CEO goals? And then how do your department goals feed that? And how does this initiative feed up into both of those two key points? So that's the first point. And then we dive into just conversations with the business. If we're hearing a great example from a CEO, and I think all CEOs are saying this right now, that, any of these decisions we make, anything we're looking at needs to streamline business, reduce touch points, and create cost efficiencies. That's just a great one that's probably generally applicable to every industry. Does your RFP do those things? Does it reduce cost? Does it reduce touch point? Is it finding innovation? Is it helping out the team members by doing those things?
Okay, I have one that's about to come in. I don't know if it's going to be, they're going to hit enter or not. Um,
Sorry,
go ahead.
while we're waiting, so one that I have for you, Kathleen, would be, as you're training, a new procurement specialist, for instance, what would be one or two things that you would want to make sure that's kind of drilled into them, that's kind of becomes the core of their procurement mindset?
Yeah. Well, first off, never be afraid to ask questions. That is an inquisitive mind, is a mind who's going to learn really fast and pick this up. I'm also big and supportive of things that we covered today, like templates or playbooks that help to onboard new team members so that they have a high level way of working and they're not walking in feeling like, where do I start and where do I begin? So those templates, as it ties back to the RFPs, are really crucial for that, giving them examples of what good looks like, and then also giving them playbooks in any way that you have them. So an example of a strong playbook would be something around contract management. What are you redlining in a contract versus what is legal redlining? That is just a key playbook for understanding swim lanes, but helping a new team member to know what they're responsible for and what they should be negotiating.
Perfect. Yeah, this question that I have coming on the side chat here, have you ever had, we've done audit work with you. I'm sure aside from the audit work we've done with you, you've looked at your vendors, you've reviewed them. Do you have any examples that might be illustrative, I guess, of instances where you find something, after, after the fact, your contract, you're working with the vendor, 2 years, 3 years down the road, you find an issue, and that really has guided how you're, something that you missed in the RFP process, right?
Yeah.
And something that you should be doing moving forward, right? Like I found something here, like, oh man, that's something that if I would have just done this, I could have avoided that.
Absolutely. I think earlier on in my career, there was a vendor that we were using for a technology, a benefits tool within an HR team. And as we went to implement it, we were finding that there was a lot of the things that they said they could do that really weren't coming to fruition, or it was not as clear as it was during the RFP process and the demo. So it felt like there was a bit of a miss when it came to the contract and then what they presented and what now they're actually delivering. That was a quick example of we need to assess how we're approaching this and pivot our strategy and get more robust, because you can never feel like you thought you were buying, a Corvette, but really a Chevy pulled up in the driveway. That's the worst scenario to be in. So what we did is went back, and that's where we wove in that pre-check to the vendors, talking to them up front, hitting them with the prerequisites, but then also through that RFP process, having a really robust reference phase, making sure that you're talking to people who know this vendor, who can attest real time to how they've implemented the tool and how it really was as good as you heard during that demo. And then, of course, it's just a good lesson always to get as granular, more robust within your contract. Your contract is your North Star within everything you're doing, and having that be as strong as it can be is crucial. Always a good lesson to learn.
Great. I have one more I really like. Generally, I'm a supplier or a vendor, right? So how do you balance transparency and confidentiality when you're dealing with multiple vendors? So when you're working through I think I've, on the other side of this, had times where like, this is kind of tough, right? Where you're asking for sometimes information that is competitive and valuable, and you want to be able to share some of it with the other vendors so that you're getting, apples and apples, not apples and oranges. But at the same time, if someone's bringing you something that's, competitive, or that gives them an edge over their competition, there might be concerns about, you sharing that throughout the proposal process. How do you balance that?
So that's a great question. In procurement, while I liken us to Switzerland within an organization and with vendors, we should never have, our preferences. We need to be net neutral. We also need to be really ethical throughout our processes and what we do. When I'm running a bid, or my team is, and a vendor asks, okay, well, what's your lowest bid? Just tell me, I'll match you. I can't tell you. Now, one, you should never tell them, because what if they actually come back and they come back lower? But you can let them know it is lower. You can give them little hints, but you should never tell them, because that goes back to your NDA that you have with that vendor. You should have some contract and some terms in place, even if it is just as elementary as an NDA, to give some protection to that vendor. Otherwise, if you're sharing that competitive information, it doesn't make for a strong strategic partnership. Vendors will catch wind of that. And, I wouldn't like that, certainly. It's going to say to the ethics of your business and how you perform.
Great. Awesome. Well, hey, I think, we had quite a bit of people register for this webinar. We've had a few come into it. Typically, most individuals who are watching this and all of our webinars are watching these things after. So I would encourage anybody, whether you're watching now and something comes up later, or you're watching it later, feel free to reach out. We're happy to put people, in touch with Kathleen through LinkedIn to answer additional questions that come up. Want to thank Kathleen for taking some time out of her week and preparing this content and walking through it. Super valuable stuff here. We typically have this kind of cut, recorded, and ready to go out to those who register, to those who attend, within about 7 days. I've been known to miss that deadline sometimes, but as we do that, we'll send that out to you all. So if there's something here you feel like you missed, or you want to review with other people on your teams, you will get a copy of this. And again, thank you Kathleen, thank you Reed for your help preparing this, and on to the next one. I'll go on mute, Kathleen, sorry.
Thank you for the time and the highlight here. I certainly appreciate it. And thank you again, Audit Tech, for your partnership. We appreciate you.
All right. Thanks all. Have a great week.